When we refer to old games being challenging games, Contra, or Gryzor as it's known in Europe, is a true definition of it. This 1987 Konami arcade game is a defining run and gun game that is likely one of the most popular games of all time in this genre. The game is presented in the typical 1980s action film style, and its artwork was actually based around a particular scene from the Predator film. Contra, which I'll refer to as throughout this video, has a couple of different styles of gameplay, run and gun platforming, as well as 3D elements or pseudo 3D elements, which are ridiculously tough at times. It is a fairly impressive game for its time, complete with parallax scrolling. I will note here that the Nintendo Entertainment System's game is known as Probotector in parts of the world. Of course, originally the arcade game was presented as a vertical centralized game, and some might argue that a particular version of the arcade game is superior in many ways. If you happen to still be with me at this point, you will likely comment that a particular version might not be here. Let's just face it, Contra, Gryzor or Probotector has been on so many gadgets and systems over the years, most of which are just emulator versions rather than conversions. So we're going to stick with the main releases here from back in the day. We are strictly sticking with the 1987 arcade original, so no countless sequels or spin-offs. Otherwise, this video could last for a solid few hours. This video is ranking from worst to best of likely the world's greatest run and gun, as requested by many people out there. What would you say if I said this DOS version of Contra was the best game ever made? Honestly, I don't think even the most seasoned DOS gamers of the late 80s would consider this version any good. It simply shouldn't have been made, full stop. It is ugly, terrible to control, sounds just awful. Really, since the developers put little effort into this version, I am putting little effort into this review. I personally wouldn't even consider this a worthy entry. The Amstrad's 1988 Ocean port is definitely up there as a difficult version of what is an already really difficult game. The biggest issue with the Amstrad CPC conversion is its single screen format rather than the original multi-scrolling format. When we make it to the next screen, bullets can suddenly be fired down at you, not giving you much reaction time to avoid it. The controller layout isn't that great here either, it just doesn't seem to be smooth at all to play. If I press down on the joystick, it will literally make our character jump to the level below. So to duck or lie down to shoot enemies, fire button needs to be pressed whilst holding joystick down. Diagonal shooting also seems a little off here too. Don't think about shooting downwards here either, because you simply can't do it. We cannot even jump and shoot both at once here. Now, graphically and in terms of sprites, it's not a bad looking Amstrad game. Obviously fairly pixelated, and there is no parallax scrolling used here. It's just really let down badly by the controls used here. Once I get to the 3D stages, the controls actually seemed a little better here, although the difficulty got even worse at this point. There is no music with this version, just sound effects, which makes it seem a little lifeless. And of course, the original game had the vertical aspect ratio, where this version doesn't. Commodore 64 had two versions of this game. This could be the case for particular arcades conversions for C64 back in the day. Both games were developed by Colin Porch and David Blade. For the European market, Ocean published it as Gryzor, and for its American release it was known as Contra and was published by Konami. Some love this version, some hate it. It seems that many are just put off by its very strange control system. The keyboard acted as the jump button, whereas the joystick did the rest. I have to admit, this could have been coded entirely just for joystick, but Contra isn't the only C64 game to receive this strange control layout. So in terms of gameplay, I found this version much easier to play than the Amstrad's version. Although the controls were a little strange initially, I got the hang of it eventually. It controlled okay, but by no means am I saying it's perfect. You literally cannot shoot downwards with this version. Just like a couple of other versions, we cannot shoot whilst jumping here either. The level designs are as faithful as it can be, although no parallax scrolling here either. Admittedly, there are prettier looking Commodore 64 games around, and this game is fairly smooth, but does suffer from some slight frame drops to be expected. We also have a fairly good rendition of the arcade music, and we also have sound effects combined here too, so we get the best of both worlds there. It is pixelated, but overall a fairly good conversion, which I won't say groundbreaking, it's just average if anything. I found it difficult to place a ZX Spectrum version of Contra. Obviously not perfect, but this seemed to play better than the previous version so far in this video. We don't have an exploding bridge here, but at least it's there anyways. Some versions didn't even have a bridge. The good thing with this conversion is the ability to shoot whilst jumping, and at times it is well needed too. It offers no parallax scrolling, but many Spectrum games didn't have this due to hardware restraints. One particularly strange feature here is that at the end of the first part of stage 1, normally the fortified building before going into the second part gives us an almost boss part of the game with turrets to destroy and enemies to kill. Not here though. The ZX Spectrum 128K game just requires us to shoot it a couple of times with no bullets to avoid and then just simply blows up. Going back to the first part of the game, yeah, it's a ZX Spectrum looking game, and in certain points it is difficult to see projectiles being aimed at us because of colour clash. Some Spectrum games had it worse than others. A yellow background with black outlines, for example, with black bullets being fired into the same area is very messy here. The game surprisingly flickers a fair amount too for a Spectrum game. I personally think that although it has the colour clash, it is a fairly decent port complete with music and sound effects. It really isn't as bad as you might think it would be by looking at this. Likely the easiest version of Contra out there, this MSX2 cartridge release was a Japanese exclusive that released in 1989 by Konami. Of course, the level design is slightly different here. The iconic bridge blowing up isn't here, and it is a single screen game which offers no parallax scrolling effects, but it actually plays really well. Something which makes this a fairly good version is that we are not constantly bombarded with bullets. The music and sound effects are nicely done here, the colours used are decent enough, very much in the style of a NES game, and the music too. I found this really enjoyable to play, and even found the 3D stages fairly easy to play through too. Things do look different here compared to many other versions, such as when dying you kind of slip backwards, and when blasting capsules for power-ups, rather than bouncing, these tend to jump up and land in the same position. Something else which is different is when we get a weapon power-up, we actually get a choice menu of which weapon to select, almost like an RPG element. Although it's not arcade accurate and does have these differences, the game is smooth to play compared to, say, the Amstrad's version, which also did the single screen format rather than the original multi-scrolling format. There is some strange goings-ons in the MSX2 release, where sprites will randomly appear where gravity doesn't seem to exist. But considering the other fairly bad versions of Contra or Gryzor, this MSX2 version isn't that bad considering. You all knew this was coming in first place. In fact, as I played through this NES 1988 Konami conversion, I suddenly thought, what was the point of this video? I like to do things different on this channel, but really, the NES port is seriously up there for more than one reason. Okay, so it's not arcade perfection at all, but it is much closer to it than, say, the MSX2 port. Sure, stage layouts are slightly different and 3D stages are slightly different too, but there is a reason that this version is often said to be better than the arcade game itself, because it truly is. I think this is the main version which most people have fond memories of rather than the arcade original. I find that the NES version is often talked about rather than the source material itself, to the point I am often left thinking, are people even aware that Contra started off as an arcade game originally? This game is also known by the name Probotector in different parts of the world. It's a decent multi-scrolling running gun game. It does suffer with some sprite flicker, but not as bad as some NES games could get at times. It sounds great and sound effects are awesome here too. We can shoot whilst jumping, weapon capsules look great, it's slightly pixelated, but most edges are more rounded off than other versions where objects and sprites looked jagged around the edges. Like I say, although this isn't 100% arcade perfection in terms of how it looks at times, the argument here could be that other versions weren't arcade perfect either. Even though some versions look more like it, they mainly failed a couple of crucial things, which was having the ability to jump and shoot both at once, having no scrolling screen, or just having issues shooting downwards. So considering all these issues with the other home conversions, I think it is safe to say this is likely the next best thing to the arcade game itself. And that's it for ranking the various different ports of Contra or Gryzor or probotector today. Which version do you think should have ranked it number 1? Are you thoroughly with me on this and say that the Nintendo NES deserves its place here? Which version did you have growing up? Was you lumbered with the IBM DOS PC version, which was just, well, shocking? If you did have this version, did you actually like it or pretend you liked it? Anyways, for everyone who's asked for this, I've finally done it. And until next time, thanks for watching.